So we are back again and continuing on the suspension journey, talking about the history and kind of diving into more theory, I think, on a lot of how these suspension systems actually function and work. Now we're going to get into the off-roading lifted suspension, which there's definitely a lot more variety of, types of off-roading suspension that you can, kind of put on your Jeep or your truck, or, we're going to get into trophy trucks and all the crazy custom built stuff. But let's start with kind of the basics of what lifted suspension is and why it's actually done.
Right. Yeah. Because if you really look at a regular car, I mean, it's got, maybe a ground clearance of 12 inches, let's say,
if that, and
right? Yeah.
depending on if you're hitting a dip and you're going,
right.
I think most people probably watching this, even on their stock car, have probably crunched the skid plate on,
Sure.
a drainage ditch or something, a dip going across the intersection.
Right.
But yeah, the basics of lifted suspension is kind of, to get more ground clearance.
Sure.
Especially if you're going over hills, going over bumps, going over rocks, stuff like that.
Any obstacle. Yeah.
Any obstacle. Cause obviously roads are smooth.
Right.
Except for if you live in LA. So maybe you need off-road suspension in LA.
That is so true.
and Louisiana. I know that's a big thing too out there, but almost anywhere, except for Arizona.
Yeah. Arizona's beautiful. It's like they lay out margarine or something like that to drive on. I love Arizona highways.
Yeah. As soon as we cross over that border, it's like,
God, it's so beautiful. Yes.
No road noise.
Yes.
Just nice cruise.
Calling
smoothing.
out Caltrans too on that one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Step your game up, guys.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's basically to get more ground clearance, which a lot of times is coming from larger tires.
Right.
So a lot of times, kind of basics of lifting the suspension or adding more ground clearance is to fit larger tires on there, which is going to give you more traction.
Right.
Might give you a wider footprint, depending if,
Well, and also
what the tire is itself.
Yeah.
It's going to have more grip if it's a mud terrain or all terrain.
Right. Well, let's even think about the sidewall. I mean, you're adding a larger sidewall. That is also part of the suspension.
That's true. So. Yeah. And that's part of I think we kind of covered that in the last one with talking about coilover suspension, where like you get into fine tuning. It's like, that's a whole nother part of the dampening and the rebound is what sidewall and what tire compound you might have. So yeah, definitely with lift suspension. I mean, now we go to SEMA and we see lifted trucks with, 52-inch tires and, Bluetooth drive shafts and huge, giant lifts and stuff like that. But it's funny, I think one of the things, because, we kind of go anywhere in the country, let's say there's, a road's a road, you're going to have similar needs on it. If you're doing a sports car, you're doing something like that.
Right.
It's definitely very much more regional when it comes to off-roading, because you have different terrain, you have, different dirt, different features, different uses that you're doing that the guy in Michigan, that's doing some mud bogging, the guy in Southern California that's out in the desert
totally different.
Is never going to see mud, or if he sees mud, he's in trouble because it's quicksand.
True.
Yeah.
True that. No, you're exactly right. I mean, there's been many different vehicles and different even suspension systems built for the actual terrain. I mean,
specific terrain.
Specific. Yeah. I mean, like look at the difference between a dune buggy and a rock crawler, just to bring up a conversation here. Your dune buggy guy is not going to go out there and try to crawl up Chocolate Thunder and vice versa. To go to Pismo Dunes. So purpose-built vehicles kind of came out of the whole off-road thing out of necessity. Yeah.
And that's, you might have a pre-runner truck or something like that that's out running the desert where he wants more travel, wants, more clearance for the tires. So the fenders might be wider, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But maybe it's not even four-wheel drive.
Exactly.
Or four-wheel drive on dunes and stuff sometimes might hinder you.
Sure.
From being able to perform. But the dude out in the sticks and in the mud or crawling up a rock or a mountain, going to need four-wheel drive, going to need locking hubs, going to need, a lot of the things that you would not put onto, a certain off-road vehicle. What is kind of cool is, when we'll get into kind of the racing history and Baja 1000, all the stuff like that. But like you look at something kind of current now of like King of the Hammers,
like
the Ultra 4 class, where it's kind of a combination of a lot of different off-road suspension needs. And it's interesting to see on that, like you mentioned, Chocolate Thunder, you'll have guys that are purpose-built more rock buggies, and they'll bounce. Maybe they'll use the suspension, use the tires to kind of bounce
Yeah.
up the rocks.
Right.
But those guys are not going to be able to go
Fast on
100 miles an
yeah.
hour on open desert land. So you kind of, for the Ultra 4 class, like it is kind of a combination rock crawler / trophy truck, kind of a unique thing of its own, which kind of brings it all together, which is pretty cool.
It's the off-road version of the Ironman competition.
Very true. Yeah. No, I mean,
you have to really kind of be good at different things.
Got to be versatile in order to be competitive in that.
Which is kind of the off-road spirit. If you really kind of look at how, like, guys that are into off-road, they are your adventure guys. They're usually your campers or survivalists. You know, guys that have no problem living off-grid. And a lot of those guys, I mean, I think that kind of is a generational thing back to even World War II, where kind of off-road starts. You know. Yeah,
I mean, and obviously the Jeep, you know, was kind of the utility vehicle used in World War II.
Right.
And obviously, you're going to have a lot of surplus of those when you come back. People are going to know how to work on them. Similar thing like we've talked about with hot rodders. But then, you're going to have some guys that go down that Jeep path. And it's kind of funny. And we'll pull up some. And we hate saying this, that we're going to reference some photos because then we don't find the photo. But like, there's some video clips of like test tracks, you know, on like basically speed bumps, not even whoops, not even anything crazy. And it's a World War II Jeep and it's all over the place.
Right.
Like, yes, that was considered off-road, but like we would look at that now and go,
like, wow,
really?
Yeah.
Dude, like you're going to kill your kidneys on that thing.
Yeah. But again, too, that was for the day. I mean, because a Jeep was made just to move personnel. I mean, it wasn't made to, you know,
be comfortable
or something like that. Yeah.
So it was just, you're going mostly more on dirt roads, or maybe there's something where there's a bunch of debris and stuff around from something being bombed out, and you got to get around it and get over it.
Well, and that's the whole, I think the GIs, what they loved about those things is that they looked at obstacles thinking like, there's no way I can climb that. And all of a sudden it did it. So that also became the, like, kind of the hold my beer type thing, you know, like, I don't think I can make it through that swamp. Hold my beer. So, you know, that's.
I was going to say, send it and hold my beer are two things for off-road guys that are going to be very, very common. And these ones were all, you know, solid axle, leaf spring kind of suspension, like your most basic rudimentary off-roading suspension, if you will. But a lot of them had some mud tires on them and stuff like that.
Well, they had those surplus tires on them. Those ones that look like those crazy kind of blocked out. Yeah. You know, they look like almost like paddle tires. Yeah, they were. Yeah, you definitely utility tires before we got any specific design for off-roading or all-terrain stuff like that. So. Yeah. But the flat fender Jeeps is what most, you know, Jeep guys kind of call those, the military, whatever you want to call it. And of course, there was
Willys Jeeps or
there was Willys, and also there were Ford Jeeps, or I think there was 3 different. And I know I'm going to catch this, you know.
No, there was several different companies that made Jeeps. Jeeps wasn't a brand yet as we know it, and it was basically the term for that type of a vehicle and the slang for it. Right. But it was contracted to several different companies to actually make that. Right.
But Willys was the one that was the most popular. That was where the foundation of what we know now as Jeep, the manufacturer, started out of the Willys platform. And that's your 7-bar grill. That's, you know, you can't really mess with that, or that's a trademark grill. So that's your Willys
the
Jeep.
Signature, kind of front end.
And you know, and they were popular obviously because, like we said, the GIs knew how to work on them. They were plentiful, and they would go anywhere. The only place they wouldn't go was on the road, because obviously having full-time 4-wheel drive made it really difficult to drive the thing hundreds of miles on a natural, you know,
on an actual normal road, normal driving.
Right. Yeah. So it was actually Warren Winches, the company that made the winches for these things. They made what we know as locking hubs. They were the first guys to make where you could actually unlock the front axle, so the front axle wasn't driving.
Free spin.
Yeah. So that was kind of a big, you know, deal that was happened in the, God, I want to say late 50s, maybe like around the 58 or something like that. Yeah. So that I think really opened up a lot of people to say, hey, look, I can even tow this behind a motorhome or a truck.
So if you've been following us on Auto Revolution and checked out some of our OBS Clash build series, or even the documentary we did a few years ago, you know we do a lot of stuff with Beltec suspension. What's really cool is they partner with us to give you guys free shipping on every order that you use the code AutoRevolution at Beltec.com. Once again, you can get free shipping on everything from OBS lowering kits to Jeep and brand new lift kits. Sway bars, shocks, you name it, you can get it at Beltec.com. Use the code AutoRevolution at Beltec.com to get free shipping. Now back to the show. It made it into a multi-purpose recreational
There you
vehicle
go.
versus strictly a utilitarian off-road only
Right.
type of vehicle. I mean, it'd be like, yeah, figuring out a way to use a side-by-side and drive it on the
Yeah.
highway or something. Basically that kind of a concept, if
Yep.
you will, for back in the day.
Right.
And that's, yeah, obviously we talk about, I mean, this isn't suspension, but worn winches and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, that's all the tools, especially ones that were probably used in World War II,
Yeah.
all apply to, you get stuck out on the trail, you bust an axle or something
Right.
like that. Yeah, you got to get yourself out of there. So, and Thurston Warren was worn winches and stuff, but they kind of, for all the speed shops that we've talked about with hot rods and stuff like that, it's kind of like, okay, now we got same kind of guys that are doing off-road, specific companies and stuff versus just general automotive or hot rodding.
Well, if you're going to bring that up, I mean, let's bring up Brian Chuchua, who pretty much took the Jeep and turned it into like a Swiss Army knife, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
He actually was another guy that was Southern California. We should back up too. A lot of the off-road stuff, even though it's hugely popular nationwide, a lot of the parts and manufacturing stuff again was Southern California.
And that's, yeah,
and it made sense.
It's what we've talked about before with, hot rodding and aerospace and a lot of manufacturing taking place after World War II in Southern California.
Yeah.
And that's, obviously we have all kinds of terrain where you can go up to the Pismo Dunes, and hit the sand. You can go to the mountains and, the Eastern Sierras and go hit the trails and do some rock crawling. So it offers a lot of options for off-roading. And then, like we mentioned earlier, it's, you get out in the Midwest or Florida or elsewhere, you're going to have a different need. There's going to be some different types, of setups and stuff for that. But
Brian was going back to Brian Chuchua. Brian Chuchua was a Southern California born guy. Loved the whole off-road scene. Pismo Beach was kind of a big deal in the later 50s. And that's kind of where the proving ground for a lot of this stuff was at. And Brian, he was the first guy to take his modified Jeep. Now I say modified because he was kind of the godfather of building a lot of aftermarket parts for Jeeps. And he was the first guy to climb Devil's Slide at Pismo Beach, which now I look at that and go like, I've climbed Devil's Slide on an ATC, like a
three-wheeler,
right?
yeah.
But back in the late 50s,
and that's, you got to look at what.
Yeah, you got to look at the time period, right? But Brian actually went on to do a lot more though. Brian, he teamed up with a guy named, I forget his name.
Doug Olson.
Doug Olson, that's his name.
Yeah.
Doug
I got the notes
you got
here
the notes,
for
right. He's a Fullerton guy, Doug
there
Olson.
You go.
All right.
Yeah.
And they opened up, and this is something that you'll know, Donavi Jeep and the dealership that was in Placentia for many years.
Very well known.
I mean, decades that dealership was there. I think at one time it was the largest Jeep dealership in the world. And they opened that up in the early 60s. And they were modifying Jeeps as well. They weren't just selling, because at the time there were the Jeepsters. I don't know if you know what those bodies are, like a long kind of weird Jeepster.
Yeah. And so it wasn't kind of like the Jeep Wrangler, TJ XJ, all that stuff that we think about necessarily.
Right. And Brian had one, a very famous one called Holy Toledo. It was this yellow Jeep that and it looks extended. It kind of looks like almost like a sand buggy, like one of those sand drag looking things.
Oh, okay.
But it was an extended wheelbase. Obviously, a lot of his own, personal parts was on there, and a lot of people followed. But Brian also too, he knew that he was onto something, so he jumped on board with the guys that were forming SEMA at the time. And became a board member and kind of occupied the off-road section of, because you had like Ed Iskandarian next to you, or you had, Vic
Edelbrock and
right.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden there's this off-road guy.
A lot of drag racing and, and that's what's interesting too. SEMA now is, and has been for a while, specialty equipment,
right.
Marketing association. Originally it was speed equipment.
Exactly.
So wasn't necessarily including off-road, but they recognize that, hey, this is kind of part of the same family, part of the same stuff. We all enjoy this, being able to use our vehicles in a way that's not just transportation, and we all come together for that common cause.
Well, and also too, Brian was really good at that, because Brian was known for a guy that drove a Jeep from La Habra, California to the Panama Canal and back. And that's a pretty good
and especially
feat.
in the 50s or 60s.
That's what I'm saying,
when it happened, wasn't as many easy highways and ways to do that. So you're talking about kind of desert running.
Yeah, blazing trail.
Yeah.
That's essentially what he did. And in doing that, he brought back so many experiences that people are like, wow, I wish I could see this. The nice thing about that is at the time there was a place out in Riverside called Riverside International Raceway that Robert Peterson and those guys put together as a race course. Well, the nice thing is the infield of it, he turned it into an off-road race. So there's your first
kind of like stadium almost, stadium kind of racing. Yeah.
Which also too got
short course or something
like a short course race. And I think that race was like in 65. He did the Riverside Grand Prix. And guys like Mickey Thompson and those kind of guys saw that stuff because they were using Riverside as a race.
Yeah, that was their normal racetrack, let's say. Yeah.
So, that also got more people kind of involved with this. Other racers, not just, off-road guys. Guys looking at it going like, hey, that looks kind of fun. How do I get into that?
No, and I'm sure too, like even for some guy who's a road course racer or, dragster, guy, it's maybe a little bit of a challenge to then do the off-roading, and you might learn a few things that'll apply to
I think
something
vice versa.
else.
I totally think vice versa. And we might be jumping ahead a little bit, but for example, Parnelli Jones, who was known as an IndyCar racer, and a very successful IndyCar racer, he got into off-road with a guy named Bill Strope, and they built Big Ole, which let's get into that later because that's more.
That's to say, as we go more into the Mexico 1000 Baja kind of type era and stuff like that, but and that's so a lot of people were using the Jeep platform as something to do, but you also had guys that were kind of a little more innovative using something you would not think is an off-road platform at all. And that's where we kind of have the Meyers Minx, coming through, and Volkswagen Type 1 or Volkswagen Bug, pan, fiberglass body with high fenders and some off-road tires and, a little roll cage or something. You got a little beach buggy.
Well, and there you go with beach buggy. That's exactly it, because Bruce wasn't looking for an off-road solution. Bruce was looking for waves. He was a surfer.
Yeah.
So, he was known for making surfboards, repairing surfboards. So he's a fiberglass expert.
I was going to say, which makes sense with doing a fiberglass body for that.
And so he decided to build a vehicle that he could go seek more different, ocean breaks without having to, use roads.
Yeah. You can, now we kind of in California, Pismo, like we mentioned earlier, is kind of the only beach you can actually drive a car onto. Yeah. But back then, you go out, along the coast a little bit, find a little spot, and have a good time.
And so at first he tried to build his own. At first he tried to build. I think he built a dozen of them too. He built a dozen of these monocod, designs that used Volkswagen parts, but were more kind of a custom design. And the problem with that is that he figured out it was just too expensive to do that. So he kind of tweaked the design to use the Volkswagen pan, like you mentioned earlier. So he's already using kind of like a foundation that he knew was readily available, easy.
Yeah, you get parts for there was. At that point, those are probably, we're talking mid to late 60s, that those were already, surplus of 20 plus years. Oh, yeah. So it's same thing as the hot rod guys using the 32s and the Model A's. Yep. Find something that's cheap, repurpose it, and have fun with it.
I don't think Bruce knew that it was going to explode like that, though, because dune buggies exploded. That became a humongous deal. Everything from people driving them on the beach to seeing them on TV shows even, where, people really were into that. And there was also a lot of guys that copycatted that because the design was innovative, but it was also easy to copy.
Yeah, it wasn't anything, and it still was fairly a Volkswagen Bug still. Like we're talking suspension-wise, we're talking, all that. Like it wasn't some huge, now they are, or you look at side-by-sides, they're basically kind of the evolution of that have full coilovers and long travel and stuff like that, but these still were a very kind of rudimentary, design. Just, hey, throw some bigger tires on it, and we're, that gets us the ground clearance. Yeah. Fiberglass body helps with the fenders to make, taller fenders to fit it, and then just have a good time.
Well, not only that, just the way that Volkswagen's made, it's light, it stays on top of the terrain, it doesn't really dig in, like it's not a heavy vehicle. Yeah. The engine being in the back helps you with traction. So it kind of was a little bit of the perfect package for what it was made for. Yeah. I wouldn't really want to drive a Meyers Minx on the 5 at, 80 miles an hour, but I would certainly drive the thing, at Pismo or down a beach or even into Mexico. And that's what he did. He took that thing all the way down to La Paz and was, again, searching for different surf. What he didn't realize is that he created basically a race. Well, I shouldn't say a race, but he created a trail that got to La Paz, which was about 1,000 miles. So in turn, more people kind of wanted to know what his trail was about and wanted to go on these adventures. And he kind of created a club.
And he mapped the path that worked to do all of that. So,
right. And that club turned into, again, when you get a couple people together, it's who's going to get there first. Well, a club turns into a race.
Yeah.
And by 67, he actually put together what's the first, they called it the Mexican 1000, not the Baja 1000.
Yeah.
And that was, obviously a club that he came up with was called NORA, which was Northern Off-Road Race Association.
Sure.
Yeah.
We'll go with that.
Yeah. So he formed NORA, and obviously the Baja 1000 got started, in that fashion. The good thing about that was the height of all of that buggy stuff, having things on TV, it attracted a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it attracted people down to that race, and people wanted to see it. And it turned into kind of like a, something that people would go after and say, I'm going to conquer this. Well, those people were Hollywood people. You had guys like, actors that were actually starring in racing movies that wanted to actually get more racing into it. Like, for example, James Garner, who was in, the movie
Steve McQueen.
Yeah, Steve McQueen. These guys, James Garner was in Grand Prix, and Steve McQueen, he made a whole movie on Le Mans. So those guys were already racers. They were already doing cool stuff, and off-road just seemed totally the way to go for there.
Yeah. And that's obviously having then that star power in there kind of helps get more attention to it in general. And so TV, Wild World of Sports was covering, the Baja races and stuff like that as, hey, now here's a new sport that's coming out and stuff like that. And obviously people are going to see these celebrities and see, this stuff happening and maybe get interested in it as well.
And the other thing too, and this, obviously we know the first Baja race was 67 but the real, I think to me, the match strike was the movie On Any Sunday. And that was like 71. And it just basically followed off-road racing in Southern California, where you had like a guy from the guy Malcolm Smith who rode a motorcycle. He was kind of the star, but also too it showed all the other racing going on, and it showed the Baja race. And I think that exposed everybody.
And that's obviously there's different classes in the Baja race, even now where you can do it on a dirt bike. You can do it in a trophy truck. You can do it
in
in
Volkswagen car.
I was just going to say that there's classes for a stock Baja bug. There's Baja bugs, unlimited,
right?
All that kind of stuff. So it is kind of a little bit of more about the race and the terrain and the distance than maybe the vehicle itself, because you can kind of do it in almost anything that they have a class for. But that becoming a popular thing is definitely gonna spark more design, more innovation in the aftermarket and in the race community to build something for that, where you're going 1,000 miles along the coast basically,
right.
So you're going to have different terrain, from desert to coastal, sand to rocks, all kinds of stuff. So you're going to have to be a little more versatile than what the Meyers Minx had or what your kind of factory Jeep and stuff had.
Well, the guy, if we're going to bring that up, let's talk about Vic Hickey real quick, because Vic Hickey is a guy that is an extreme innovator. He's done things even at the corporate level with General Motors. Obviously he had a lot to do with the second generation Blazer being built. And also he went on to help manufacture the Hummers later on in the 80s.
True. Yeah.
But his roots...
Or the Humvees.
Humvees, I should say,
Hummers was the Tahoe, basically, later on. And
But he... his first car, he kind of took a little bit of a spin-off of the Meyers Minx himself, and he built this thing called the Baja Boot. And the photo will show it all, but it looks like the car you draw in the 4th grade.
Canyonero.
Yes.
If you know that Simpsons reference, Canyonero.
Yep. So he, but the good thing about that is he built those for people that wanted to get in off-road. So you had your celebrities that ran Baja boots. James Garner actually won the race in a Baja boot. So that also was something that guys were now starting to build purpose-built race cars for off-road racing.
Yeah. And that's, you mentioned too, with him helping with GM and the Blazer, you started to get, aside from Jeep companies or anything like that, or Willys, you got now companies like Ford, Chevy, GM making production models that were advertised and built for more adventuring, as they called it, or outdoorsy stuff like that, but for off-roading, whereas, maybe you had a, big old, 4x Chevy. I can't even think of what the 50s trucks were called.
Nebscos or
Napcos, yeah.
Napcos,
Napcos
right?
and stuff
Yeah,
like that. But it was like, it was a big utility vehicle, not meant necessarily for off-road adventure. But then, you had the Bronco, the Blazer, all of those that were, a lot of open top. So pulling a little bit from the Jeep and the Meyers Minx for that kind of feel and four-wheel drive. But those were still a lot of factory leaf springs, solid front and rear axle, all that.
Because four-wheel drive, actually, like you mentioned, four-wheel drive was not a readily available thing in the 60s. It was something that was purposely built, usually by an aftermarket company. And like, we mentioned Nebco, that company, but and those were built for towing, like hauling.
I was gonna say, it was more for just having
like
more
logging
functionality and like logging,
that kind of deal. Whereas, we're also forgetting one that kind of was the precursor to the Bronco and to the Blazer, which we're forgetting the International Scout.
True. Yeah.
And the Scouts came out before, obviously, the Broncos, but it inspired Ford and Chevy to kind of get in the game.
Yeah, definitely.
And Bronco, I want to say Ford was kind of more all in first. The 66 Bronco was kind of obviously the first generation that was a purpose-built four-wheel drive. I don't want to call it a sport utility vehicle because that didn't really exist back then. It was just more of like a Jeep hybrid.
Yeah, it was their version of a Jeep, basically, if you will.
And then, Chevy had to follow with the Blazer, but Chevy followed with the Blazer first gen was a modified C10, or I should say K10.
K10, yeah.
Right? And it wasn't really until the second generation Blazers that really kind of took off. And that's where Vic Hickey actually had a lot to do with that and had a lot of his kind of, you could see his name on a lot of stuff. But going back to the Broncos, because again, the late 60s and early 70s, the first gen Broncos were that was the four-wheel drive thing to have. More people looked at that saying like, it had a V8 in it. It, was way overpowered for what that thing was, but that meant that you could do more with it. So you had more guys like, we're going to talk about a guy named Bill Strope, who pretty much is Mr. Bronco. And he was the guy that really kind of modified these things past just your regular modifications, which maybe we should bring up kind of some of the modifications at the time that they were doing.
Yeah.
Because really, like, let's go back to ground clearance and oversized tires. So
that's to say, if that's your basic kind of off-road suspension, is how can I get bigger tires, which equates then to more ground clearance.
Right.
Now it's like, okay, now what's next? Now what can I do with the suspension to actually make it more functional?
Yeah. And these guys, everyone kind of based off of just improving what the factory had already done. So four-wheel drives back then, they weren't independent front suspensions. They were straight axle, two axles hooked up to a transfer case. Doing that meant usually you either had a coil spring in the front, like what the Broncos had, or you had a leaf spring, like what the Blazers had. And to get more ground clearance, obviously you had to modify that and lift those.
Yeah, so maybe you're using blocks or at a rudimentary level or different springs.
Yeah. Well, a lot of guys, what they do is they would re-arc the springs, or they would obviously build a taller spring for the front coil springs. But then also, too, guys in the rear, you would use like a shackle, for example, where you could actually lift the body up. Right?
Yeah, basically, drop it down, and instead of like we do lowering shackles, lift shackle obviously does the same thing in the opposite direction.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned blocks too. Blocks were another thing. You could put a lifting block in there, and that would give you more ground
a couple inches of that.
And
were body lifts even prevalent then, or that's
more
maybe
late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah.
Because again, too, like everything, if it starts and works well, it's always better if it gets bigger.
Yeah. So, or what else can I do? How much can I get more?
Yeah.
Now I'm good on ground clearance with the frame, but I need more fender clearance. So let me put a body lift on it, something like that. Yeah.
Right. But that was kind of in the early 70s. That was kind of the game. Is how do I get over more terrain? More parts are being available, because also too, we got to remember that tire manufacturers didn't really embrace this yet.
Well, and this is kind of the time when they actually finally started to.
Yes.
And a lot of that was coming from the Baja 1000 and the score races and stuff like that, the popularity of off-road racing, that now the tire companies that maybe are sponsoring Mickey Thompson, for his drag stuff,
right?
Well, okay, now these guys are racing and doing organized racing. Now there's opportunities to sponsor off-road racing, but they need a sell on Monday tire.
That's right.
That would apply for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's great you bring up Mickey Thompson, because most people are going to say like, well, wait, he's a drag racer. He's a land speed guy.
Well, he's an everything guy.
He's an everything guy.
Anything that had wheels on it.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was the other thing. Mickey knew that was a growing sport. He actually was the guy that formed SCORE Off-Road Racing. You know, but he was in need of, he was running thin. I mean, in the mid 70s, he was already doing, you know, he had just closed Lions Drag Strip in 72. You know, he was looking at more land speed records through Bonneville at that time. And plus two, Ontario International Raceway opened up that Mickey was kind of, you know, the grand poobah, if you want to call it that. So he actually reached out to, of all guys, a magazine guy. The name Sal Fish should be something that most people know in off-road racing, because for
definitely.
many years he's been the guy in charge of the Baja 1000 or Baja 500 race as well. But Sal Fish was actually a staff writer for Hot Rod magazine.
Yeah,
and got
so not the off-road side of anything.
Totally opposite.
You know,
but Ack Miller, who worked at Hot Rod, he was an off-road guy. He was also a drag race guy too, but he really liked the off-road stuff. He did a lot with Bruce Meyers, and you know they did a lot of stuff back and forth. So him and Sal Fish had the assignment to go do the Baja 500, I think at the time, and they did it in a Meyers Manx, and drove back, and actually Sal was really good at it, you know, and he liked the assignment and thought it was a good time.
enjoyed it. Yeah,
and Mickey saw who he was and kind of saw what was going on with him, and he knew he was kind of a connected guy, and so he actually kind of commandeered him, if you want to say, to get into the score racing and actually start making the Baja 500 and 1000 what we know of it as. Because by the time Nora was kind of more of a club, it wasn't really a racing
organized,
association. Whereas Score was definitely something that was, we want an organized event type racing, more like NHRA.
Yeah.
And Sal took off with it. I mean, from 73 until 86, you know, he was working for Mickey until he finally took over and bought out, with his investors, bought out from Mickey's estate, where he's owned it since 86 and is still
out there
doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing to see that.
Yeah.
So, but you would never guess from a magazine guy, right? Just, hey, dude, you know what you're doing?
No, but even especially more of a hot rod magazine guy, where it's like, Peterson Publishing, who did hot rod, at the time and stuff, had, or they started eventually, Jeeper magazines and off-road four-wheeler.
Peterson's Four-Wheel and Off-Road.
Peterson's Four-Wheel and Off-Road is, a magazine that they started. So it's like, they were all kind of involved in it. It's just, figuring out your niche and going for it.
Right. So the other thing too about this off-road stuff was, I mentioned that a lot of racers got into it. A lot of fast racers. We're talking about Mickey Thompson. We're talking about, obviously
Parnelli Jones.
Right? And I mean, those guys are used to going 200 miles an hour.
Yeah, plus.
So going 40 miles an hour in the desert gets kind of old after a while.
No, and that's true. Like, yes, these were off-road or rock crawling, kind of slow cruising, but not like, as fast as some of these guys maybe want to actually go. So you're going to have to build something to make that happen. Right.
And if you look at, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the off-road guys in that time period, they were basing a lot of their vehicles off of the stock stuff and just modifying what the factory did.
Like we said, getting maybe a little more ground clearance, a little more articulation, a little more, room to play with.
Yeah.
And especially too, one thing we didn't really mention, and this comes into play, especially even later on, is like your approach and departure angle.
That's true.
So
as well.
some that might have to do with some suspension, but a lot of it maybe has to do with the bumpers or the skid plates, the stuff like that. Because you've got all the ground clearance in the world, but when you're hitting a incline or coming down into a rut and you're smashing the front end, you're losing a lot of speed and you're you don't want not able to control it.
You don't want to stuff the bumper.
Yeah,
literally. I mean, if that, by doing that, you could crash too. So you didn't.
You could roll it. You could flip it. You could roll it. Yeah.
So I want to say, and of course, all of us want to know about trophy trucks. I mean, that right now is the top of the food chain.
That's
I mean, look, we even have Ford Raptors that simulate a trophy truck. That most people think that they are trophy trucks. They are not trophy trucks. But where
it's like the guy in the Corvette that thinks he's a full blown race car, and
so those guys, I'm going to give Bill Strope and also Parnelli Jones a lot of credit here, because I think that those two minds came together saying, like, I want to go fast, Bobby.
Well, and I think too, like, talking about kind of trophy trucks or what we're getting into, especially with talking about this, of kind of the birth of trophy trucks or more purpose-built off-road, rigs for that. You look at where those guys came from, or where Parnelli came from, of Indy and stuff, in full tube chassis, full dedicated race, suspension. It's like, well, I can just do that in a taller, wider, bigger fashion and make it for off-roading, the same as it can be, in any car basically, and kind of use that, methodology and thinking and apply it to the off-road world.
And that's exactly what they did with Big Ole, which Big Ole is kind of if you've looked at off-road before, you've seen a picture of Big Ole.
Yeah. And we're calling it Ole because it had the Olympic beer.
Olympia beer.
Or Olympia
right.
beer,
yeah.
that's right.
Yeah, so they were Olympia beer sponsored. It was supposed to look like our first-gen Bronco, okay? But closer you start looking at a little bit closer examination of it. It's a tube chassis, full-blown built, purpose-built race car is what it is.
It just had side panels that looked like a Bronco.
Right. And even those side panels, there's no doors. They're all one piece. Those were fiberglass, which was a huge, deal as well to a lot of those guys because the Broncos were still steel vehicles.
Well, and that's the thing too. Yeah, you're just like Rubbins racing, like off-roading. Yeah, you're gonna smash some fenders, you're gonna crack some stuff like that. And so, especially now, you look at all the trophy trucks, all the race trucks, all the off-road stuff. It's all fiberglass body because, you need to unpin it and throw the fender away or sign it and give it to a fan.
Right.
Throw a new one on for the next race and you're good to go.
Or the fender's a liability. It needs to be torn off. There's that too as well.
No, and that's, you got it flapping in the wind and stuff like that.
But I think that all kind of, if you go back and look at that, that's
kind of the model. Ole. Yeah, that's the foundation of a lot of the off-road racing. And
most of it was built, obviously Parnelli had a lot of the design ideas, but Bill Strope was the guy that built that thing. And Bill Strope is the king of the whole Bronco, movement. But he actually had some competition again because Vic Hickey, obviously working with GM guy.
Old Ford versus Chevy.
Yeah, old Ford versus Chevy. So he built the Blazer version of that. And I think that's where that class, because obviously those guys became the overall winners. They became the front runners. So people started to kind of mimic what they were doing. And what were they doing?
Yeah.
They were taking, again, fast race car suspension ideas, coilovers.
So now we're talking independent. No, it was Big Ole.
Big Ole is a two-wheel drive.
It was two-wheel drive.
Yeah, okay. Because they figured it out. They figured out how to get on top of, again, suspension, tires, all that stuff, get on top of what they're trying to go and take more of a boat idea to it. If you stand on top of the terrain and keep on top of the terrain, you're going to go over terrain instead of trying to crawl it.
Yeah, you're kind of skimming it,
exactly.
if you will, versus
skipping a rock.
Going up and down, and then you're catching, the rhythm. Like we've all done that on the freeway. You catch the rhythm of the springs and the shocks, and now you're just going out of control.
Yep. But that's where you start to see, like we mentioned, coilover shocks, multi shocks as well. Some guys, would run 2 shocks per tire. Starting to see more.
What would be the purpose of that, of running the 2 shocks? Just more strength,
double the dampening.
Right,
because at the time too, you were still talking smaller.
I would say it's probably just the technology at the time wasn't there on the shocks, but you had 2. Right. That's going to give what can be actually.
And they were just trying things like, hey, 1's not enough. Let's try 2.
Yeah.
Right. Or hey, we need to make the shock bigger. That doesn't happen until the 80s. They basically
no, that's what I'm
said,
saying. Like you couldn't have a bigger shock or different thing necessarily. So let's add another one and see what happens.
Right. And also too, let's get away from leaf springs. They figured out that leaf springs were actually causing too much recoil and they were actually throwing the vehicle. So
you're talking unsprung or sprung weight and you're, not able to control that as much, for it. Whereas, definitely would do with the.
Yeah. So I want to say that's kind of your birthplace of the trophy trucks, and that of course too, now that got more people involved. They got more people thinking, well, if you can do it in a Bronco, what happens if you change the wheelbase to a truck? Do I go faster? Do I go slower?
Yeah.
And obviously faster was what it was.
And I think too, obviously at this time, we're talking about a lot of racing and desert racing, but this is also the time you got to think of the monster trucks started popping around and Bigfoot, and stuff like that, where now those were, a lot of them were maybe originally modified truck.
Right.
The big old leaf springs, big old tires. Yeah. And then they started making purpose-built ones like that. But that's a whole different application for it because that is more strict ground clearance, maybe some mud traction, stuff like that. And then obviously going, over the top. But
Bob Chandler is America, basically, because everything he thought of with Bigfoot was, I just want to make it bigger.
Yeah.
Right. And so he took that. The original Bigfoot 1's a 74, bought it brand new, 74 F250, and he put basically tractor axles on it and tractor
and tires.
Columbine tires is what those were. And that started from, like you mentioned too, mud bogging. I mean, Bill Chandler's from St. Louis, Missouri. there's no desert.
Yeah,
in
there's
Missouri.
no, yeah.
So mud bogging is a big deal. I mean, they even have like full on contests where they'll soak a whole pit and see who could drive through it. So two things.
And you got your tractor poles and stuff like
Oh,
that. It's
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
in the same
from the
genre
same vein,
and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, but and you know, look at those guys. They want how much they wanted enough enough ground clearance to make the hole, but also enough flotation and enough traction to get out of the mud holes.
Yeah.
So that's your basic thing for monster trucks. It wasn't until Bob drove over a car.
Yeah, then it became
that
a
really
monster
made it,
truck.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah. But and we all know Bigfoot. Bigfoot is ingrained into every car guy's mind somewhere. If you were young enough to drive a Power Wheels, then you probably know what a Bigfoot is. But also too, that turned into, now you look at Gravedigger, which if he can do it in a Ford, I can do it in a Chevy. And Dennis Anderson, I mean, dude, Kill Devil Hills, South Carolina, which is all sand dunes. And he comes out and builds Gravedigger out of a 51 Chevy panel vehicle.
Yeah.
But that turned into an icon, where people wanted to see those two trucks compete. That was a huge deal in the 80s.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that, Bo, a lot of that came from also too another sport that kind of was a hybrid about it, which a lot of people thought that it turned on that persona, which was wrestling.
And that's your heel, your bad guy versus the good guy. Your Bigfoot All-American versus Gravedigger, and that kind of stuff. So there's that entertainment value that kind of came from it where, racing, stuff like that is, the entertainment value is maybe either seeing them crash or who makes the finish line.
Right.
And that's obviously going to inspire then a lot of, people to do huge over the top, lift suspensions and stuff like that for the mud terrain and for the different types of terrain that isn't necessarily what you saw on the West Coast with, Mexico and the desert.
Yeah.
So you're going to start getting companies like Skyjacker and Superlift and all these guys that are coming out of places like Louisiana or the Midwest that are catering towards kind of the taller lift crowd versus, the dune buggy kind of desert stuff.
Right. And I don't want to really, pick on anything or like that. But if you look at desert was more about function, going over terrain fast, whereas the guys in the Midwest and in the South, they were more about conquering terrain. So going through those big, mud pits and all that other stuff. I mean, there was even there's a race that they actually race in water. That's a swamp race that I used to watch it on TV when I was a kid, and they had this thing called the Sippy Hole. And they have these like really weird looking vehicles that they would build that looked more like a boat than anything.
Yeah.
And they would actually race around the water with these like really tall, skinny tires, but it was all still off-road racing. I mean, they took a lot of the ideas behind it to get there, and it's just hilarious to see that kind of stuff. But that's, again, American innovation. I mean,
that's just having fun with it and using the terrain to your advantage. And, kind of the one thing I think, another aspect that that kind of mentioned, we kind of cross over is going to be like that rock crawling type stuff where you're not trying to go 80, 100 miles an hour through the desert.
Right.
You're not sitting there with gigantic tractor tires, getting through mud, but you need the most articulation.
There you go.
So now we're talking about ground clearance, we're talking about shocks, we're talking about lift. Now we can talk about articulation,
right?
And unhooking the sway bars or longer link bars with taller springs so that you can actually get one tire up over a rock on this side and still have the left side, the driver's side, planted
and catching traction
on the ground and catching traction. So that way, when you got your locked hubs, you got your 4-wheel drive, you're able to kind of independently crawl over each versus just going over a whoop kind of straight through.
And that's, again, innovation, because most of the stuff prior to like link bar suspension that we commonly say now, it was leaf springs. Like it was like, okay, guys, how tall do you want your leaf springs?
And that's what it says. Yeah. How tall can you go?
Yeah.
Or,
how many stacks do you want to put on? How much weight do you want to carry? How tall are your shackles? That was all about lifting the frame taller over the tires.
Yeah.
Whereas link bar suspension, now it's like, okay, I still want that ground clearance. I still want the tire size, but I need to make sure that the tires are planting on the ground.
Yeah. So I need to say they're moving around and able to kind of go over all this different terrain that, is going to be a huge rock, formation going up the side of a mountain.
Right.
Or it might be a trail, out, in the
Moab.
in the mountains. Yeah.
I mean, look at Moab, and half of the stuff that's been conquered has been conquered because of innovation of suspension. You know, you look at your some of the things that you go like, there's no way those guys drive up that thing, and then you see a guy in a regular Jeep drive up the thing.
Yeah,
it's amazing. But
I've also seen guys in like a regular Civic drive up that, like Hell's Revenge.
Yeah, true that.
it's
true
pretty.
that.
It's
Right.
entertaining,
That's
definitely
entertaining,
sometimes. Yeah,
but you know,
they might not make it. But,
right. But I mean, that's kind of the whole idea that, you know, it started with that rudimentary, you know, flat fender Jeep that now we've got multi-purpose, different lockers, different things that help with traction.
Yeah, because you can do your pneumatic, you know, locker and electronic, you know, locking you know, hubs and stuff like that.
Right.
And, you know, and then now you're talking about, especially with some of that rock crawling stuff where, yeah, you might be banging stuff on to a rock. You're getting, you know, beefier axles,
right?
You know, beefier axle housings, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to the 80s, because the 80s was, everything was about being bigger, excess.
Well, that's just it. Yeah,
more.
80s is when monster truck stuff really started to take off.
Right.
You know, and you had a lot of the stadium races that Mickey Thompson was doing, you know, so you know, with the mini trucks, basically, I mean, those were like Nissans and
Toyotas and S10s, like all of that. Yeah.
And, you know, Ivan Stewart, you know, who's a Toyota, you know, aficionado and was doing a lot of Baja stuff, but also did a lot of the short course kind of stadium races that Mickey and stuff was putting on.
Right. And I mean, that goes back to, like I said, other drivers came in. Rod Millen, who drove for Nissan in those stadium races, you know, he's a car racer from New Zealand.
Yeah.
You know, his brother, Steve Millen, was, you know, multi-time champion for Nissan, you know, so those guys, they actually kind of got into that sport too. But it was great because you're now racing off-road races in a giant stadium where, you know, you've got 50,000 people watching.
Yeah, you can actually have fans and stuff. And then a lot of times maybe the monster trucks were the mid, you know, race entertainment or
vice versa.
Yeah, or like what we have a lot of times now where, you know, you'll use the same dirt and motocross one weekend, monster trucks the next weekend, but you go look in the parking lot and everyone's got a lifted truck.
Right.
You know, stuff like that.
Well, the 80s, and like you mentioned, the mini truck craze kind of started with the 80s, obviously leftover from the fuel crisis in the 70s.
Yeah.
So a lot of guys...
The popularity of it, definitely.
And the manufacturers really were pushing that in the early 80s because to them, they were like, these are our new trucks. Oh, we can race them in front of 50,000 people? Sure. So you had, you know, Mickey's son, Danny Thompson, was a big driver in that race, and he, you know, had an S10 that was very popular. You mentioned Ivan Stewart. We mentioned Rod Millen. You know, those were kind of the big names in the stadium race stuff. But the guys watching it in the stands, were buying mini trucks.
Yeah, and they were going out to the desert, and they were going out.
Well, not only that, we were driving up and down. You know, this was kind of a way to show off because bigger is better.
So you're taking it to the mini truck shows and the hot rod shows.
So we're putting 44-inch, you know, monster mutter tires on a Toyota freaking 4-cylinder.
Yeah, a little mini truck.
Right. You know, but that was the trend, you guys. That was like, you know, if you drive down the street,
monster minis, as they call it.
Monster minis. And you, because it was a spectacle. You would see them like, I can see such and such driving down the street, or, you know, this guy's got, you know, bigger tires. But the other thing too, that the trend that I cannot get away from the 80s, because it's so 80s too, was not just one shock, not just two, but how about 25?
Well, yeah, we mentioned like earlier of like off-road guys throwing another shock on to get a little more dampening out of it, or, you know, kind of dial it in. But yeah, now it's like if 2's good, 20's better.
Right. Yeah.
Then you completely ruin the entire usage and functionality of having a shock on there.
So guilty as charged on this one, because definitely the trend was to have, you know, like those multi-shock deals, and, you know, 4 shocks are just fine for those things. So we would actually...
And we're talking just regular shock, not like a big old King or anything like that.
Just an old gas-charged...
Just normal...
You know, normal monobody style shock.
With a pink, you know, boot and stuff, of course,
this is where Rancho suspension comes into play. This is where, you know, all of a sudden now the mainstay of off-road comes to the general public. And, you know, having 25 shocks on a truck, well, you would actually take a drill and drill out the bottom of it, so the oil and all the
so it would be
charge, it would just be a dummy shock.
Yeah, it wouldn't have any functionality to it at all.
Not at all. And then that led to...
But it looked cool.
It looked cool. And of course, then it turned into, well, now you got to chrome them, and then, you know,
you get the big old shock hoop and stuff like that.
And then the show car kind of scene kind of came to the monster minis, where, you know, truck runs were real big, and, you know, of course you can drive the thing down the road, but no one's going to look at it unless you go to a truck run. So truck runs became a big deal, where guys would lay out the whole thing and chrome as much stuff or powder coat as much stuff as you
Well,
could
and
underneath them.
I was gonna say, yeah. Now you're going from, let's say, a lowered truck, tucking tires, to a lifted truck where you can see
Everything.
all the spending, depending how big of the lift is and stuff like that. Now you're seeing eye level almost, the frame, the front suspension, all the different aspects of it. So yeah, the show part of it's gonna definitely come into play. But also too, I mean, we're talking about the mini truck stuff. A lot of them had a different suspension setup that was a much more of a car-like style suspension than your Blazers and your bigger trucks like that were all leaf spring, more or less.
The Toyotas were very popular. The Nissans were harder to lift. So that's
because were the Nissans more the torsion bar.
That was the problem.
Setup.
That was the problem. Is Nissan actually, engineering wise, the first Nissan 4x4s were actually better trucks than the Toyotas. Because they had a torsion bar style deal. I want to say Toyota had the straight axle until 1985, whereas Nissan came out with their independent stuff in '82. So Nissan was really the
kind of a little more ahead of it.
A little more ahead of the deal. And Nissan at the time was a stronger company too. They weren't, Toyota was kind of floundering a little bit, where Nissan was definitely growing. But in '86, Toyota actually changed over to an IFS suspension. And that's where you start to see what we were going to call what's referred to as a drop-down cradle. Whereas they would just basically take the lower part of the two A-arm, or the lower A-arms, and they would lower those down and put like a spacer in between that suspension.
Yeah, on that cross member.
Right.
Yeah.
So that would actually give you the lift in the front.
And it would give you a little more travel and stuff like that too with some of it.
They weren't as strong. When they first came out, no one liked them because they weren't as strong as a straight axle. Because, I mean, a straight axle, you can run into a wall, basically, and the thing would still, operate. Whereas the independents, they'd fold up a little bit. But the ride was 100% different. And it goes back to what you were saying, too. Had a lot more articulation. Because now you don't have to rely on the axle being fixed where it couldn't droop out. Whereas the independent would actually allow that tire to droop and catch traction. So design was way better. But us off-road guys,
it just wasn't strong at the time necessarily, but that's when, you started to get more aftermarket companies and people that would build independent front suspensions, systems that were just as strong or even stronger than, your traditional setup.
Now, the funny thing, GM and the American companies, Ford as well, Dodge as well, they didn't really catch on to the independent thing until the later 80s. I mean, the first independent truck for GM was the 88 model. And Ford, I want to say, was even later than that, because Ford actually already had a pretty good straight axle, but it wasn't a straight axle.
Yeah, the Ranger.
Well, not the Ranger,
but
the full size, where they had the twin I-beam style suspension.
I-beam suspension.
Right, and that was also another thing that was very, very well sought after about off-road racers, because you'd get a lot of travel. I mean, those things, the way that those axles would pivot in the center would allow the front wheels to actually droop out.
No, and it's kind of a little bit of a model for a lot of the pre-runners and stuff, and which obviously the Ford Ranger is a huge popular pre-runner, style, truck and stuff for a long time.
Yeah.
But
the guy that made the Ranger famous was a guy named Manny Esquera. And he was a Parker, Arizona native. So he, of course, owned the Parker 400. I think he's won it more than anybody. But in a little Ford Ranger, and I mean little Ford Ranger, like the 82, not the full size
the square
Rangers.
body.
We're talking the
Ranger.
mini truck, and he was factory backed though. He was backed by Motorcraft, so he kind of had Ford, saying, "Hey, send me some certain things." But for a while, he owned the Class 7 class, which is your factory class, race car class for off road. But Manny Esquera, man, that guy, he pretty much put the Ford Ranger on the map. But other guys too, like, you mentioned Ivan Stewart. Ivan Stewart was, a Toyota guy that, they call him the Iron Man because he wouldn't race with a co-driver.
Yeah, he would. Well, and that's why that's a term,
right?
Iron Manning the Baja 1000 or something like that. Meaning, you're going solo and you're doing the whole race.
Right, you're doing the whole race by yourself. So, I mean, you didn't have anybody. You got to look at it. The co-driver is your navigator and also your backup driver. Which guys will switch out. Whereas Ivan Stewart, he also built his own truck, designed his own truck, drove his own truck, pitted his own truck. I mean, the guy was the whole package. I've met him on countless times, and he's the nicest guy in the world. He'll talk to anybody too, and he'll give out advice about a lot of different things.
I got some stories with him as well, doing some photo shoots, and he likes to have fun and sneak in some stuff that you're gonna have to Photoshop out later.
He totally does. Yeah, he totally does.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of these.
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't gonna do it or say it because YouTube might flag us, but
yeah. But no, he's a good guy. I mean, he really is the guy you want to go off roading with, because he'll show you, oh, you're doing that wrong. No, you should take this. line.
Give you some advice. Well, and that's what happens a lot too with off roading is you talk about your co-driver with navigating, and showing where it is, but also then too when we get into the rock crawling stuff, it's like, you're gonna take this line. So having your spotter that's out there watching your tires or making sure that you're picking the right line or giving you some advice is almost as crucial too as the suspension or the tire setup is.
And in any racing, you're always going to have a really nice guy that's going to help out everybody. And in any racing, you're going to have the guy that is the jerk that doesn't want to talk to anybody. Okay.
There's that. So what's that in the off-road? Who we're calling out right now?
Robbie Gordon. Okay, but Robbie Gordon, I don't blame him for his attitude. Bob Gordon, his dad, was a huge figure in off-road racing for many, many years. They drove the buggy classes, the Class 10 classes, and they dominated. I mean, literally dominated for decades. And Bob Gordon brought up Robbie to be a competitor, not to be a friend. So that's the reason why Robbie Gordon has that winning spirit. He has that competitiveness.
No, and it's and there's different philosophies for different people of, I'm helping you, out, or I'm giving you advice and no big deal, or, hey, we're all just doing this together, versus like, well, if I help you and give you more advice, you're competitive now to me.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, maybe he's not a complete, asshole and stuff like that, but it's just part of that kind of keeping it into yourself and not, spilling your secrets, if you will.
Robbie's attitude is, I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to win. And there are race car drivers that are like that.
Yeah.
There really are.
It's competition for them.
It's competition.
Yeah.
That's why they're there. Now, Robbie obviously is a huge, standout guy, but back in the 90s, he was still the younger guy that was trying to, make his name in the business around his dad. Because again, Bob Gordon was such a huge figure.
No, and that's the problem is kind of now you're Bobby's kid or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, we all know Robbie did pretty well on that deal, and he is a fierce competitor, but he's also a very calculated, and also now, I mean, with his son Max, he's doing so well because he's able to give so much information over to his son. Yeah. And also too, the technology is way different now.
And I'm sure that obviously that has a lot to do with it, and I think maybe that's kind of where we pause on this episode, and we'll dive into the next one where you're doing things in an off-road vehicle that the guy in Vic Hickey probably never dreamed of doing in the 60s, or all these guys, because now we're talking 100+ mile an hour through the desert, open whoops with just
insane,
like you're just on the freeway, basically.
Right.
And that takes a lot of computer aided design CAD, work to get the engineering part of it down, where it's engineering, but you're thinking, okay, how can I go like this or maybe like that? Now it's tons of functionality and, full droop, suspension, where you're getting 20 inches of travel, out of something, and you're, like I said, just able to tackle almost any terrain. We haven't even touched on like some of the Dakar rally stuff, where now you're out in Africa in the middle of nowhere
driving a Unimog that looks like a freaking Star Wars thing,
some giant earth mover, basically. So that just kind of shows the versatility of off-roading and the lifted suspension, if you will.
Exactly. Sounds like fun.